That's great. Kevin and Sherry, wonderful to see you. Wonderful to see you. We're in Matthew, if you didn't know. Been there for a long time. Jesus and his disciples have left the upper room now. They've shared the memorial feast, the Passover, which has been transformed by Jesus. Judas has already left. He's finalizing the betrayal. Jesus now leads the rest of his group out and to a familiar place just outside of Jerusalem. If you don't know the place, it's called Gethsemane. It's on the Mount of Olives. It must have been a wonderful paradise, a garden, peaceful retreat. So in Matthew's gospel, we're picking up the story, chapter 26, starting in verse 36. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, so stay here and keep watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." We imagine this garden nestled in the grove of olive trees, named after an oil press, and I'm pretty sure the disciples could not have understood just how much this moment will press Jesus. Judas knows exactly where they are. They go here often. They will come. Judas and his entourage will meet Jesus and the disciples later. But before Judas gets there, Jesus has some serious work to do. It's prayer work, not with his hands, but with his heart, with his mind, with his will. So they're walking to the garden. He leaves the bigger group here and says, "Now the three of you come with me," and they go over here just a little farther. Peter, James, and John, who, if you remember, were with him on another mount, the Mount Transfiguration. These three are with him because he needs them now. His three closest friends go a little farther, and he's about to leave him, but he needs them near him. It's a hard place he's in, the hardest so far. Death is sneaking up on him, but he knows it. He feels it. It's heavy. It's almost like the hands of death are already squeezing the life out of him. Matthew's words are, he began to be sorrowful and troubled, and Jesus, while trying to tell his disciples what it's like, he said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." And maybe that's an understatement. I suspect it's accurate, more than we can imagine. We use language sometimes flippantly, like watching that scary movie the other night. "I was scared to death." We don't mean that. Jesus meant this. Do you wonder how it felt to be him? You ever put yourself in his place and said, what would that be like to feel what was coming? If you knew men who hated you and would be thrilled to watch you die were coming, if you knew that Roman soldiers who were experts in their field and were assigned to kill you very slowly and very effectively, if you knew that the demons of hell were itching to tear you apart limb from limb, if they could, how would you feel? Jesus didn't just leave those friends there. He challenged them, "Stay there and watch for me." He needed them more than they could understand, but just to be there as a friend, to be watchful and waiting. He leaves them and goes a little farther, and he puts his face on the ground. His head is in the soil. He pours his soul out to the Father, and pay attention to the prayer. "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me." That's real, and that's honest, and that's raw. If anyone thinks Jesus has a holy halo and he's been gliding through life, almost floating above the ground, then they don't know the truth about Jesus. Some of the classic paintings of Jesus in Gethsemane, if you've seen the ones I've seen, shows a sweet, serene scene of him looking up into the heavens, maybe hands clasped in prayer, possibly leaning on a large rock, even glowing during a sweet, wonderful prayer. But I'd like to disagree with that depiction and stick with Matthew's account, which is brutal and ugly. It is all-out warfare, a death match to see who survives this and who does not. And I know some folks, because I've read them, say Jesus wasn't really afraid to die here, but I disagree. I think he dreaded it beyond what words on a page can tell us. But then again, it's not just a man fearing his death. As Erdman describes it, it's a bitterness which no man has ever tasted. This is the cup Jesus speaks of. This cup is the pivotal moment in this scene. It all comes down to the cup, because this one who is surely God, he is divinity in the flesh, is also human. He is vulnerable. He's very much like us. He doesn't want to suffer or die just like we don't. We all want to avoid it if we can. The cup, as he says it, it's a way of experiencing suffering to endure death. And if you know what's coming, then it is the experience of thorns driven into a scalp, the full force of fists against a human body, the loaded whip that will be thrown down and pulled across the bare back, the nails driven into flesh, the emptying of blood as it exits the body and leaves him hollow and dead, but all along the feeling of anxiety and dread and humiliation and terror and loneliness, all while he's dying. That's the cup. But the cup is even more than that. It's not just an unpleasant experience or even death. It's a way of talking about God's holy wrath. In the Old Testament, the prophets used it like that. Even in Revelation, it's used like that. So more than just what he has to endure, it's the full weight of a righteous God's terrible wrath on the sin that has to be atoned for. And in a short time, Jesus is going to feel every single sin of every single human who's ever lived, and he will feel the punishment of every one of those. So no wonder he says, "Let it pass. Take it away. I wish to forego it. I don't want it, Father. Please, I'm begging you, please don't make me." It's a real man who's going through his moment. And Wright says it's a meltdown mode moment. He has looked into the darkness, seen the grinning faces of all the demons in the world looking back at him, and he begs his Father not to bring him to the point of going through with it. That's what he is passionately praying. It's only the first part of his prayer, though. He's pleading not to have to die. Not like that. Not with all of that. It's natural and normal. It's what we would all want to do. Avoid it. And Jesus faces all of it and more and prays like this. And no wonder, I don't want to die. Don't make me do it. Like to avoid it at all costs. And I'm guessing those words are not whispered in soft tones as they go over the tongue, but they are gurgled out, gruffly brought from the bowels of himself. We zero in on this part, and I don't want to miss it, but I also don't want you to miss the second part of the prayer either, because it's just as important, maybe you would say more so, the plea that speaks past the terror and gets to the will of the Father. There's the plan. There's the purpose of his coming. There's where salvation will come from. So beyond the beginning of the prayer, there is the but that carries to the completion of the prayer. The but, the yet, the however, the not as I will, but as you will, Father. I don't know what other words Jesus used when he prayed for maybe an hour. Maybe he kept repeating the exact same words. Maybe it sounded something like this: I will submit to you, to your will. No matter what, I will obey. I want to walk around this, but I'll trust you if you make me walk through it. If this is what it takes, then I will follow you willingly. This is not about me. It is about you. It's what you want. This is about you, Father, and being faithful and doing what has to be done. So for the good of all, let me die. None of us wants pain and suffering. We all pray. It is natural to pray. I don't want that. But I think all of us have to get to this point, somehow this point in our lives, if we are true followers of Jesus, to say, but if you lead me right into the pain, right into the suffering, if this kills me, so be it. I will follow you there. Maybe you've been at a crossroads in your prayers. Maybe you need God to answer. Please, you cry and you scream and you plead. but all you can do is wait and wonder and watch to see what He will do. And if you've been there, then I hope you'll come here to Jesus' prayer and maybe take some comfort from it. If his father does not answer the prayer, is as he asked in the beginning, I don't want to do it, does it mean he doesn't care? Absolutely not. If he doesn't answer the first part of that prayer and rescue him, does it mean he can't? He's not willing? No. Of course he can. Of course he's willing. Of course he cares. But he can't. He can't. This is where we come to this conclusion that is truth. There is no other way to save the world than this. There's no alternate ending. There's no better way to tell the story. This is it. Either Jesus bears all of our sins on the cross, or we take the full force of the righteous wrath of God and are condemned to hell with no hope. So the Father wants to save the Son, but He can't. If He saves His Son, we are damned. So which will it be? How will He answer? What will come from this? Jesus knows the decision. He knows the dilemma. The Father knows it too. But this is what He came to do. He's been resolute all along to finish what He started. If this will save the world in the overwhelming pain of the moment, if death already is crushing Him and will finish Him, if this is the fight of His life, then Jesus is in it till the end. At some point, after about an hour, I guess, Jesus gets up and goes to check on His disciples to see how they're doing in the fight. They've been waiting for Him, watching for Him, staying awake for Him, praying for Him? Really? Verse 40. He returned to His disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He asked him to stay awake, and surely that was not too much to ask, but then again, maybe it was. They folded in their fight to just stay awake. Jesus challenges them and singles out Peter, and I think it's because Peter was so strong. I will die with you. Really, Peter can't even stay awake. I figure Jesus is hugely frustrated with them. How could He not be? But I see how He is showing them grace even now. The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak, He says. True, and maybe He's pointing to something even more spiritual and deeper than just a desire to stay awake. And with that, Jesus goes back to the same place to do the same thing again for a second time with mainly the same prayer, repeating maybe some of the same words, but it appears something is moving even within him in Him as He says, my Father, if it is not possible for the cup to be taken away, unless I drink it, then may your will be done. And He goes back to His dearest friends, and what does He find them doing? He came back again, found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So He left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Have you ever been bored in a class at school while the teacher is drumming on about some subject you care nothing about? And it's Monday, and it's been a long and exhausting and wonderful weekend, and you just ate lunch, and you're sitting at your desk, and sunlight comes in, peeking through the window, playing on your face, and every inch of you would like to stay awake, but the eyelids feel like 10 pounds each. Or, you ever been listening to one of my sermons? Not today, not talking about you, talking to the guy next to you. And the preacher starts talking, and he keeps talking, and after a while it sounds like blah, 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 and your eyes are feeling it, and some of you are feeling it. I watch you. No guilt. The disciples are living this. The disciples are losing this. But Jesus has compassion. This time, instead of challenging them, apparently He lets them sleep. Goes back by Himself to the battlefield again in prayer for the third time, and then finally He He returned to his disciples and said to them, verse 45, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come. The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Get up, rise, let's go. Here comes my betrayer." He comes back, wakes them up with a gentle challenge again. A little more rested, I assume they are. Maybe they're ready to face what is coming their way, but I know this, Jesus is fully ready to embrace what is coming his way. He is done praying. It's time to get to it. He has his answer, and the answer has not changed since it was put into place long before man ever knew what the plan was. These friends had royally failed Jesus. He asked them to watch. They couldn't. Stay awake. They couldn't. Pray. They couldn't. As Card puts it, he's going to face all of this alone, and he knows it. Time has come, time to die. And the sinners who do not deserve the blood of the Son of God are about to lay their hands on him. He knows what's coming, so he tells them, "It's time, my betrayer has come." And I wonder how shocked they'll be when in the next verses, Judas comes leading the group to get him. But that's for next week. Before we're done, can we think about just a couple things? First of all, how many times these disciples have failed, huh? Even right here in the garden, 3 times they can't stay awake. Just stay awake. No, they can't. And all the times before this, when they were faithless and could not trust him and could not fight Satan, they did not survive the test. Before the suffering has even begun and the weight of the world is on Jesus' shoulders, he is submitting to his Father. He is going to march on, as he says, "As you will, Father, as you will." But I'm slightly embarrassed for those disciples, and truly sorry and embarrassed for me too. The number of times I have failed him. The number of times I have been faithless. I have not trusted him. And I could not even survive that temptation when he is going to the cross for me. But I will always be grateful for him in this situation, doing this. Thank God it ends like it does. Wow. But I want you to see, I want to point out just 3 different things that you might miss. If you can't see with your physical eyes, and you can't because we're not there, I do want to point out some things I don't want you to miss, all right? First, in this garden, there is another garden represented. Do you know it? There was the first garden ever mentioned in the Bible, and it's called Eden. And the battle in the garden here is won by Jesus. He submits to the Father's will and obeys him. But the first garden with Adam and Eve, they failed. They gladly gave up their submission and obedience to God, refusing to do his will, while Jesus does exactly the opposite. In some ways, you could say Jesus is redeeming the garden. He's redeeming the first garden with this garden. He does it, what they could not do or would not do. And even before he saves the world on the cross with his body and blood, in some ways, he's already saving us with his obedience. Did you know that? So that's why Paul would write in Romans 5, "For as one man, Adam's disobedience, many were made sinners. By one man's obedience, Jesus's, many will be made righteous." He's winning the battle for man in a moment in the garden when man had already blown it and lost every hope in that first garden, and every man since has followed in the first man's lead. Thank God Jesus redeems us in this garden. Another one I want to point out, who might be in the shadows, you may not see him clearly and directly, is Satan. He's here. He's working. He's tempting Jesus to forego the cross. Remember when he tempted him in the wilderness and then left him to find a more suitable time? I'd say this is suitable. And I think Satan is there working overtime in this garden. The disciples don't understand the temptation facing them because they don't even see the tempter. Jesus knows him, the tempter, and fights him in the moment and wins against him. But while he is dueling the deceiver, the disciples are drifting off into dreamland. They're missing it. You can't see Satan in the garden, but I promise you, he is there. And if you're not careful this week, you will miss him in your life too. You will come to a moment, an opportunity, your own garden, and you will miss him who is ready to defeat you. Because he is constantly, as Peter describes it, he is constantly roaming around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And if you aren't prepared this week, you may find him, face him, and be defeated by him, even devoured. And there's another who's represented here in the garden too. I know I'm taking liberties because it's not there, but do you know who it is? It's me. You're there too. The whole world is waiting, wondering what will happen. I know we're here looking back, but in some ways it's as if we are represented there. Jesus is victorious, and it makes the next victory possible. We speak and pray and sing about the cross, and we should, but the cross and the grave would never have happened if he didn't beat him here. If Jesus didn't walk away from this garden ready to face Calvary and the grave, then we would not be here doing this today. If Jesus didn't decide to go on from there, there would be no cross for him and there would be no hope for me. This isn't one man praying for himself that he could not have to die. It's one man praying that the whole world could be saved by what he's about to do. Because if he chose not to die and he had that right, then we would be lost. We would all lose hope of heaven if the garden scene ended somehow differently. So in some ways, we are there. Because it all hangs in the balance in this moment. And one more, don't want you to miss this either. We hear of him, we hear Jesus praying to him, but I just want us to understand that this fight and these feelings that Jesus has is shared by another, and it is the Father. We put ourselves in the place of Jesus. What would that be like? Hey, put yourself in the Father's place. What would that be like? I said this a long time ago. March 2nd, 2013, his name was Mitchell Jones, and he died on that day. Just a 10-year-old boy from Utah had been fighting a losing battle against this debilitating disease. It was a muscle-wasting disease that claimed every single victim that it got its hands on. Mitchell's dad started writing on Facebook, and the ordeal, it was called Mitchell's Journey, and followers from all over the world would tune in to watch what he would type. And one day near the end of the journey, Chris, that's Mitchell's dad, wrote this. Although my young son was dying, I realized death wasn't the end, but it was a painful goodbye, even for now. Reunion may be as well be forever away for me, for my heart aches and yearns to have him back with me the way he used to be. That is grief. As death echoed closer, the veil between this place and over there became increasingly thin, and sometimes I wonder what it would be like were we allowed to see all that is truly happening. Perhaps we might be startled to see all the hands unseen that carry us in ways we do not appreciate or feel. There was a point when Mitch asked me, "Dad, is there any other way?" And I held my son quietly and I wept. Countless were the nights I begged God for a way out. I pleaded for mercy. I begged for my son. As his father, I would have traded places with him without a moment's thought. I asked God, is there any other way? As I tried to listen to my father, I was reminded of another one who asked for a bitter cup to pass, and not even he was spared. There's a saying that reads, most people wish to serve God, but only in an advisory capacity. How oft have I been tempted to think my finite mind knows better than my infinite Father's? So many times my heart cried out, please, not this, anything but this. And I begged God for another way as though I might devise a better plan, yet I cannot see what he sees. I don't know much, he writes, but what I do know is this mortal life is a place to learn and grow under the tutelage of a divine teacher, a place where we learn how to see in the dark and hear the voice of God in our own wilderness. I can't see that. I can see that now. I understand there is no other way now. Yet here I am, talking of pain and suffering as a divine tutor, and I find myself on my knees, drenched in tears, begging for relief, scarcely able to bear the weight of this sorrow. You think Jesus knew the agony in the garden? I promise you, Jesus knew, but so did his Father. I don't know how either one bore it, the sorrow, the separation, the feeling of helplessness. If this is the way to save the world, then he has to do this. But he learned how to do this, even in the moment. You may think Jesus had nothing to learn, but not true. He learned obedience. Hebrews 5, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Jesus was heard. His Father heard him, hurt for him, would bless him, one day raise him up again after death. And he is even now in this moment seated at the right hand. But at this moment in this story, in some ways his hands are tied. He heard him pray and scream and plead and beg, "Save me, rescue me." But his Father did not lift a finger to stop it. Do you know why? To save me. To save you. So understand this. God could not save me and his Son at the same time. So he let him die so I could live. You too. Do you understand that? Will you respond to that? Let's stand and sing.
I've a home prepared where the saints of